Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks so much for being here. I'm very excited for today's show, and I'm glad you're here. Let's talk about the president's path forward here. I will be honest, I keep bouncing back and forth between it's definitely over and wait a second, it's definitely not over. The media sure wants you to think it's over, but check out these numbers here. Actually, let me share this first. So there was a poll done in 2018. 67% of Democrats said it is definitely or probably true that Russia, quote, tampered with vote tallies in order to get Donald Trump elected. So we heard 4 years, and 67% of Democrats believe that's true. 4 years of Russia hacked the election. Russia rigged the election. 4 years of that from the Democrats. And today we're supposed to believe that no one would ever, it's rock solid. Rock solid, no one would ever change the votes in this election in Philadelphia. Also, before we give you the numbers, I am under no illusion that if the roles were reversed, so if Biden was way in the lead on election night and Trump came roaring back and was just squeaked out every single state he needed to squeak out, I am under no illusion that Trump would be declaring himself the winner and the Democrats would be crying foul and filing lawsuits and laying out conspiracy theories all day, every day. Remember, these are the people, the media was pushing this massive conspiracy that Trump was manipulating the post office to rig the election. Do you remember that? That was like a week. The media gave full legitimacy to Trump literally destroying the post office so that ballots cannot be delivered on time. They had congressional hearings with the Postmaster General, right? But we're supposed to believe that there's no way, right? All of a sudden now they're like, oh no, everything's great. Nothing to see here, election over. And final point, always remember the left thinks Trump is Hitler. The left thinks they are getting rid of Hitler. When you believe that, you can justify anything. Okay. Here's what Trump's doing. These are the numbers the media will not tell you because, again, they want you to think that it is a done deal. It's 2 phases. First phase, very simple. A recount and audit. Nothing complicated here, nothing tricky, nothing sneaky. It's by hand, though. And every vote is going to be combed over and checked. So we're looking at Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania's got a couple more things going on here, but certainly Wisconsin and Georgia, simple recount by hand. And I really believe Trump is going to win those states. I'll tell you why. Dick Morris is working with Trump's team. He said yesterday in Georgia, Trump's down like 12,000, I think, in Georgia. There's 10,000 people over the age of 90 who voted. There's over 10,000 people over the age of 90, and there's 2,000 people over the age of 100. So the Trump campaign is calling up each of those people and saying, hello, are you dead? No, you're not. Oh, that's wonderful. Great. Did you vote last week? Because it says here you registered to vote last week and then voted. Is that true? They're calling up each and every person. Then Morris said there's also 40,000 provisional ballots in Georgia that have not been counted yet. And these are mostly day of voters. There's a couple reasons you could have a provisional ballot, but mostly it's people who go to the wrong precinct. They go to the wrong polling location, right? Like last year is at the elementary school, this year is at the church, right? So they go to the wrong place and you fill out a provisional ballot. Those are mostly going to be Trump voters, and those haven't even counted. They will on a recount, that's for sure. That's Georgia. I think Wisconsin's even easier. So those issues are still at play, right? And they're going to go through and find out if people are dead or not. But Trump's down by 20,000 in Wisconsin. There were 2.5 million mail-in ballots in Wisconsin. First-time mail-in voters usually have a rejection rate of about 3%, right? Maybe they don't put a signature on it or something like that. Wisconsin's even more complicated. Wisconsin, you need a witness signature and you need a witness address. And if not, it says very clearly on the ballot, you throw it out if you don't have those things. In Pennsylvania, only 0.03% of ballots were rejected. And again, usually first-time mail-in ballots is about 3%. Similarly in Wisconsin. So even if Wisconsin had a rejection rate of 1%, boom, that's 25,000 ballots right there. Just that. And the reason these counties didn't reject the ballots properly is because they were overwhelmed with them, right? There's too many coming in. They couldn't do it. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. They couldn't go through with the fine-tooth comb that they needed to. So they're just like, yeah, just take them all. But now we're going to go back and be like, oh, that person didn't put a signature on it. Can't count that. All you need is 1% of those, and then it's gone. Biden's lead. Pennsylvania, all those things and a couple other. Trump is down by 52,000, I believe was last I heard. There's a case, and this gets complicated. I don't want to spend forever on this. But there's a case in Pennsylvania court just ruled in favor of Trump on an issue. And the court said that the Secretary of State of Pennsylvania does not have the statutory authority to change election laws before the election. Now, we're not going to go into detail. Actually, we just did a Facebook Live this morning, and I went into the great detail of what that case is actually about. I'll tell you, it's not about the ballots that have arrived late. This is separate from that. But what this does is it sets precedent and momentum for the Trump legal team. I am 100% certain that the Supreme Court will throw out the ballots that arrived after Election Day, which is going to be many thousands, because the Secretary of State unilaterally changed the law and does not have the statutory authority to do that, as this other judge decided. So you're going to have some court victories in Pennsylvania. If nothing else, it's going to whittle down Biden's lead. In Pennsylvania, they can only do a recount. That's not true. They can do a recount if the lead is less than 0.5%. Right now, Biden's lead is 0.8%. So if Trump's team can whittle down that lead a little bit, just to the 0.5, then you have a full proper recount. The state legislature could also trigger a recount, and I'm sure they will. But it's amazing to think about these things. And there's others too, right? Surely. To know these things that the media is not talking about. And then to also realize that it's the same media that a month ago, Mark Zuckerberg, social media, and the big media companies were like, oh, we're not going to announce a winner. No winners announced. Hillary Clinton saying, Joe Biden, whatever you do, don't concede. And now the same media is pushing this narrative, all the votes have been counted. And they just simply haven't. And I mean that simply, like this isn't even like a grand, it's like, oh, let's see if people put signatures on the ballot. Like this like basic stuff that the Trump team has yet to do and is doing as we speak. Second step, this one is a bit more. Graham Allison. Graham Allison is a professor at Harvard's Kennedy School. He used to be the director of what's called the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs, which is now run by Ash Carter, who was the former Secretary of Defense. I say that because he's not a slouch, this Graham Allison guy. He's not some random blogger on the interwebs. He predicts a 20% chance that Trump stays in office for a second term, which again, way more than the media is giving him. Let's go over this quick. So first thing to know here is that voting for president, it's a bit of a charade. There's nothing in the Constitution about people voting for president. The Constitution says that each state legislature decides how they pick the electors who then go to DC and vote for president. For a while, we've let the people vote. Each state legislature said, you know what, we'll let the people vote. But still, in the end, all the authority rests with the state legislature itself to decide. As Graham Allison said, state legislatures have the constitutional authority to conclude that the popular vote has been corrupted and therefore send a competing state of electors on behalf of the state. So they have the constitutional authority to conclude that the popular vote has been corrupted and therefore send their own electors. So let's say Pennsylvania, right, which is controlled by Republicans. Let's say the state legislature is sufficiently convinced that there was enough fraud that they could say, we can't even determine who really won the state. So we're going to send Trump electors to DC. Now, you say this is crazy. This happened in 2000. Remember a couple of weeks ago, we talked to a former Florida state assemblyman. And he said, yeah, back in 2000, with the whole hanging chads and everything, we weren't sure who won. So we were convening a special session, and we were going to declare, as Republicans in the state assembly, we were going to declare that Florida's electors go to George Bush. They didn't have to do it because the Supreme Court ultimately ruled in Bush's favor, but they were ready to do that. So there's precedent for this. Here's Graham Allison. To repeat the bottom line, in the words of the 12th Amendment and historical precedent, offer a credible, stealthy, winding road that could lead to Trump's victory and a second term. Or as the saying goes, the opera ain't over till the fat lady sings. There was another law professor, and this is amazing. We're gonna spend more time on this one another day if it becomes more applicable. Edward Foley. He wrote in the Loyola University Chicago Law Journal. In 2019, he mapped out an election scenario, which is exactly what's happening right now. It's wild. He said Trump would be up in all these states on election night, and then Biden would take over. He calls it the blue shift. He called it everything last year that's happening right now. It's wild. And here's what he said. He said, if during the canvass itself, Trump can gain traction with his allegation that the blue shift amounts to fraudulently fabricated ballots, then it becomes more politically tenable to claim that the legislature must step in and appoint the state's electors directly to reflect the true will of the state's voters. You can laugh at it, you think it's crazy or not. That's not my point here. I'm not here to convince you that he should do it. I'm telling you that's what Trump is going to do if it comes to this. This law professor who wrote this article, it was before COVID. It was before mail-in ballots, and he was talking about fraud. This is when Georgia usually has about 90,000 mail-in ballots, and this year had just under 900,000 mail-in ballots. So this guy was talking about the case for fraud being made when there were only 90,000 mail-in ballots. So now we have 900,000? I don't even think the case will be that hard to make, especially after they do the hand recount. And if Trump is successful at making that case, just wait for the Democrats to burn everything within sight to the ground. But the media has a role in that too, by saying the whole thing's over, locked, shut, sealed case, and Trump's stealing it. But of course, that's the narrative that they were going to go with. If there's anyone, like if Mitt Romney were president and if Mitt Romney were running for re-election, he would have conceded Wednesday morning. If there's anyone who would see this through to the end, it's Donald Trump. So again, phase one, just recount and audit. Let's just count the votes. Still haven't counted the votes yet. They haven't done a proper vetting of them. They will. Step two, we'll see. Monday, was it Monday? The stock market shot through the roof and gold prices went down a little bit. And we tend to get focused on the day-to-day of investments. And if you're a day trader, that's fine. If you're a normal human, think a little more long-term. I promise you, as hopefully I convinced you, the chaos of the election is not over. I'm certain of it. We know that Biden's COVID advisor is thinking about a 4 to 6 week national shutdown. That's what Biden does, right? And then we still have to pay for the trillions of dollars of bills and trillions of dollars of printed money. Those are economic realities that the emotional swings of the stock market ignore, right? On Monday, everyone's like, yay, vaccine. And then by Tuesday, oh wait, we can't get it to people until next year or something. Or all like there's emotional swing and then like a smashed reality. And that's true with the economy as well. Be like, oh, the economy's going great. And then it's like, oh, wait, we have trillions of dollars of money we just printed and inflation's gonna go through the roof. Nothing will ever outlast gold and silver. And you can own it with just a few minute phone call. Patriot Gold Group. Any questions you have, they've never been busier. But still, a real person's gonna pick up the phone. A+ Better Business Bureau, 4 years, Consumer Affairs 5-star, #1 gold IRA dealer. If you believe that there are real underlying problems with our economy that we've just been kicking down the road, then you need to buy gold. And if you believe that inflation will go up and the value of the dollar will go down, then you absolutely need to buy gold. And you do it from Patriot Gold Group. 1-800-798-4260. 1-800-798-4260 or patriotgoldgroup.com. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, my point of this segment is it was the media and people on the left who for years have been talking about voter fraud. Again, we talked about Russia earlier. 67% of Democrats think that Russia changed the vote tallies to benefit Trump in 2016, right? So the left's been doing this for years, and now all of a sudden, oh, no, everything's perfect, everything's great. No election fraud, never. It's impossible, actually. What are you doing? You're trying to steal the election from Biden, from the people. Check this video out. This is Dr. Andrew Appel. He is a Princeton professor of computer science. His bio says his specialties are software verification, computer security, and programming languages. I don't know his politics at all, but, I don't know this politics at all, but my point is this is not some right-wing hack or random blogger. This is a Fox News story about him from 2016.
He is the bane of election officials because Princeton University professor Andrew Appel says a touchscreen voting machine, the type used in about 10 states, can be tampered with.
I unlock the back door.
In 2008, he demonstrated how as part of an election lawsuit against New Jersey officials. While he notes there has been no documented case of a machine actually being hacked this way in a U.S. election, he says it could happen by simply swapping the machine's computer chip for his own.
And I'll just have to replace this one ROM chip with a fraudulent computer program.
He was able to change the votes the machine counted.
I figured out how to make a slightly different computer program that just before the close of the polls, it shifts some votes around from one candidate to another. And I wrote that computer program onto a memory chip like this. And now to hack a voting machine, you have to get 7 minutes alone with it with a screwdriver.
I mean, do you think that guy's a right-wing conspiracy hack? He's a computer science professor at Princeton. So I looked him up. September 22nd of this year, so just like a month or so ago, 2 months ago, he did a podcast with Princeton University about voter fraud. Now, before we play these, remember, to the left, Trump is Hitler. He's literally Hitler. Stealing babies at the border, all the worst things you could possibly imagine. Not to do whatever it takes to get him out of office could be seen as unethical if you're on the far left. You with me? So if you're on the far left and Hitler's in office, you must do everything possible to get him out. Do you remember back in July, some hackers hacked into the Twitter accounts of like everyone, like Kanye, Elon Musk, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Apple, Michael Bloomberg, Warren Buffett, Floyd Mayweather, all the Bitcoin Twitter accounts. They hacked it. I think it was like 130 accounts in total. Like the biggest Twitter accounts in the world. They hacked into it and they were asking for like send us Bitcoin money and we'll send you more back, right? It was a scam and they ended up making a bunch of money from it. Do you know who did that? It was a 17-year-old from Florida. Hacked into Twitter. You'd think Twitter would have pretty good anti-hacking software, pretty good anti-hacking protection, and some 17-year-old outsmarted them. But we're supposed to believe that any election today is unhackable. All right, so this is the Princeton computer science guy. He's talking about DREs here. These are called direct recording electronic voting machines. It's the touchscreen. So you just press a button and the computer records the vote. And he's very careful here. He says the computer records your vote or a fraudulent vote. He says, depending on whether the legitimate software is still installed in there or whether a hacker has been able to replace it with a cheating software. And he said back in 2003, 2004, a ton of states rushed to buy that specific type of voting equipment. Here it is.
And by 2003, 2004, computer scientists were already explaining to policymakers this basic point of computer science that a computer does whatever program is running in it today. And on election day, how can you tell which program is running in that computer?
So it's been hard to find what state has what type of machine, because not only is it statewide, but every county can have different machines. But my understanding is there's 5 states that currently use paperless touch screens, which there's no paper trail. I believe Georgia is one of them. In 2016, there's 67 counties in Pennsylvania. In 2016, 50 of them had these paperless screens. And the best I could find that in 2018, they passed a state law that says no new purchases in the state of Pennsylvania can be without a paper trail, can be for election machines without a paper trail. But that doesn't necessarily mean that states switched out their old ones without a paper trail. So I don't know. I really don't know what states do it and what states don't. I'm certain that Trump's lawyers will get to the bottom of that one. Now, I want to bring up a little nuance here. There's another type of electronic machine called ballot marking devices, BMDs. So you have a touch screen, and you finish, and then you press a button, and it prints out a paper ballot. And then you take your paper ballot and you feed it into a scanner. And the scanner is what counts it and then recounts it if necessary. So you may look at that and you're like, oh, well, that's okay. Like, I don't know why you'd have the touchscreen part, but okay, like, that's fine, right? At least there's a paper trail now. It turns out, and they've studied this, only 7% of people check their ballots to see if what they punched into the computer screen matches what's actually printed out. So you may press one guy and another person comes out of the screen, or comes out on the piece of paper that you then feed into the machine that counts it. Only 7% of people check. 93% of people don't check it. Even if you notice that it switched your vote, right? Let's say you voted for Trump and it prints out Biden. Even if you notice, you raise your hand, you complain to the voting official there that what happened, and then you just vote again. What are you going to do beyond that? What are you going to do? Are you going to invalidate the entire precinct's worth of voting? Here's what he says about it.
But all their neighbors, the 93% of voters who don't carefully check their ballots, can have their vote stolen. And a hacked, fraudulent ballot marking device can steal, instead of trying to steal 10% of the votes and shift them from one column to another, it can steal 9.3% of the votes. That's 93% of 10%. And you might think, but this voter caught the machine cheating red-handed. That's evidence. And we should use that to what? To invalidate the entire election? Are you saying if a few voters raise their hands and say, that's not what I marked, that the election should be invalidated? That doesn't work. If you start doing that, then anyone can start raising their hands and claim, that's not what I marked, and try and get an election validated. So the problem is, even if a few voters catch the machine cheating, there's no recourse for them. And for that reason, ballot marking devices are a really bad idea.
At the end of the podcast, again, this was on September 22nd, he was asked what the biggest concern is going into this election. And he said it's vote by mail. And he was asked how secure it is. And he said, well, you need a clear chain of custody. A clear chain of custody needs to be established and confirmed and reconfirmed during any recheck. So the Supreme Court is going to have to decide if a chain of custody is securely established with ballots. So it's like the ballots go from here to here to here to here, and then, oh, where'd they go? And then, whoa, they popped up magically here again, right? So is that chain of custody established, and is it, if there's any breakdown, is it enough to invalidate an entire group of ballots? Or convince the state legislatures to vote on their own? This is a New York Times headline from just the other day. It says, election officials nationwide find no fraud. No fraud. No fraud. Nothing is here. It's the top of the fold, big time, New York Times. No fraud at all. And it's just amazing that progressives for years have been telling us about insecure voting machines. We just heard it from the professor there. But this election, completely unsubstantiated. That's the line they always, unsubstantiated. Here's the Wall Street Journal editorial. You guys can throw it up now. And by the way, Wall Street Journal, not a conservative newspaper. The editorial side is more conservative. The Wall Street Journal newspaper part, the news part is not. So there was this whole article about foreign suppliers, about how Chinese and Russian companies make the processors and the screens and software for many of these different voting machines. I'm not saying that's what happened here. My point is, these news stories talked about voter fraud, not only potential, but likelihood. That article was December 15th, 2019, a year ago. But now, totally out of the question. And you disgusting conservative, how dare you even bring, how dare you bring it up? I gotta put you on some sort of list now. A do not hire list. It was whatever the conservative from the Washington Post said. You shouldn't be allowed in polite society if you dare question anything along these lines. And I said it before, if the roles were reversed, I'm certain that the left would be screaming about it. And I'll be honest, I would be here saying, oh, the election, it's final. The results are final. It's fine. There's no fraud. Right? We'd both be doing it. Let's just be honest. That's the game. That's politics. But get off your high horse about that. You were the ones who were screaming about election fraud for all these years. Again, my comfort comes from the fact that Trump is ruthless. And he is going to fight tooth and nail. I love that expression, tooth and nail. It means you're going to fight like a wild animal to get to the truth. And the other good news is there's a clock ticking. Like, we got to hurry up and get to the answer here. So that's good too. I think we'll get the truth quickly. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, I want to keep with this theme of how the left for years have been saying, voter fraud's an issue and Russia stole the election, all these other things. And now all of a sudden, no such thing. Pedro Gonzalez wrote a great article in American Greatness. He's an assistant editor over there about accusations from this last election. Pedro, how are you, brother?
I'm well. Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Thanks for being here. So let's start with the Public Interest Legal Foundation out of Pennsylvania. It says here they've claimed there's 21,000 dead people on the voter rolls ahead of the election. What do we know about that? And do we know how many of those could have voted?
Right. And so oddly enough, this is apparently not so unusual that sometimes dead people end up on voter rolls. What's a problem is that if they're registered as active voters. And as it turns out, that study found that more than 12,000 are registered as active voters, and about 90% of that number of the more than 20,000 have been dead for more than 5 years. So altogether, this is not normal that you have that many people that have been registered to vote for that long, and the fact that more than 12,000 are active. So this is an instance where I think anybody who cares about election integrity should be concerned. This seems to be kind of deliberate. It's hard to make a mistake of this kind of scale, or it's just remarkably incompetent.
Yeah. What does active mean? Does that mean they voted in the most previous elections?
I think so. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Because again, it's not so. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say. So what would that look like? So is that paint the picture for me? So does that mean, especially in this election, a dead person? A ballot gets mailed out for a dead person and it ends up at somebody's house and they just take it and vote on behalf of that person? Is that what that looks like?
I think I'm assuming, yes, that someone basically just fills out a ballot on behalf of someone who is deceased and then just turns that in and hopes no one notices. So,
is there a way to catch it this election? We were talking about Dick Morris earlier saying that they're making phone calls to everyone over a certain age right? So. Right. Can these votes be overturned if proven that they're dead?
Yes. I mean, there's not. That's the point of these investigations. I think it's important to kind of remain as neutral as possible as we're going through this, and just obviously it does look like fraud happened, but I think it's important to not kind of shoot ourselves in the foot and make all of these allegations because it kind of discredits us. We're trying to discredit the people that we think rigged elections across the country. So I think we have to seem like the party that's interested in election integrity. I think that's the purpose of these investigations is to figure out what went wrong and hold people accountable so this doesn't happen again in the future.
You're so right. I forget who it was Washington Post or someone, and they wrote this whole article about how all these accusations are absurd, but what they did is they just picked the 5 most absurd. Right. They picked the low-hanging fruit. They obviously didn't pick the fact, this statement that you just made there. All right, give me another problem that you saw from last week.
The one in Wisconsin, I think, is really remarkable. So the Wisconsin Election Commission reportedly instructed municipal workers and vote counters to fill in the the witness information on absentee ballots. So absentee ballots, when they are submitted, they have to be signed by a witness. The witness has to put their address in. So the WEC actually instructed people to, if you get these ballots, these absentee ballots that are not completed properly with a witness statement, then you can fill that in. And anticipating legal challenges or an audit and a recount because of how highly unusual and inappropriate this was, they instructed municipal workers to fill in the witness address and information with a red pen so that those ballots would be easy to find in a recount. So that was Wisconsin. Again, this is another thing where it's just super unusual and alarming that this would happen. There's a reporter named Dan O'Donnell who was covering it, and I think that story got leaked by a whistleblower. And it's all across the country. There's all these examples of whistleblowers reporting these anomalous things that are just. It's not like that this happens, every other year or something like that. This is pretty unusual stuff. So that's in Wisconsin.
Weird. So why would, if it were fraudulent, why would they have wanted it to be possible to go back and find out what votes they did that with the red pen, right? Why wouldn't they just want to make it look as normal as possible?
That's a good question. I think maybe to cover all their bases, it makes it seem as if, it's not that we tried to cheat, it's that we tried to improvise. And, it's really unusual. It does kind of give them a covering of a sort. If you were trying to get away with cheating, this is kind of a way of saying, well, we weren't trying to get away with it. That's why we used red pen. But again, it's just so unusual that the WEC, because there's a statute, there's a Wisconsin statute that states, how to fill in these ballots. And the WEC just kind of shot from the hip and bent that statute over their knee.
My understanding is on the ballot, it says explicitly that you must do these things or else your ballot is thrown out in Wisconsin.
Right. Yeah. So potentially
there should be no question what's next. Yeah. Do we have any idea of how many ballots that is?
Potentially thousands of ballots are going to be invalidated in a recount because I don't remember the exact number. I don't think there was an exact number, but that's what Dan O'Donnell said in Wisconsin, is it potentially invalidating thousands of ballots.
I mean, think about this. My understanding is there's 2.5 million mail-in ballots. Surely 1% of those are going to be thrown out, and that's it. Boom, there you made up your 20,000 difference.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's not a small number.
That's crazy. That's insane that people have called these races.
Yeah.
All right. So what do we do? Because you mentioned these whistleblowers, right? And I've seen these reports here and there, and I haven't given them much mind. These affidavits. Of people saying they saw this, they witnessed this. How much credibility should I give those when I read them? Is the fact that it's an affidavit make it more credible, or can people still lie just the same?
I think if it was just one or two, then, you could maybe kind of just dismiss it. But the fact that there are so many affidavits filed all over the country, and especially in key states where the race is really close, I mean, this should be making your spidey senses tingle. Just the sheer number of them that have come in, and the fact that it seems like a lot of them are turning out to be pretty serious. This is not small stuff. Like in Nevada, you had an election worker whose affidavit claimed that voters were allowed to cast provisional ballots without a valid Nevada ID or driver's license, so long as they were able to present proof that they have an appointment at the DMV. So, worst case scenario in my mind,
prove that they have what at the DMV? Sorry,
an appointment. So if you can produce proof that you have an upcoming appointment at the DMV, then you could cast a provisional ballot in Nevada. That's what the election workers affidavit claims. So I moved to Ohio in 2019, and I got an appointment to go to the DMV to get rid of my California driver's license and switch to my Ohio driver's license. I didn't have to provide any. I don't recall having to provide any proof, that I'm actually like a resident of my state now, and so I don't know if it works differently in Nevada. But that again that's really unusual, and you can see that the problems that if this election worker is telling the truth, that is a huge problem for a state like Nevada.
There's big cases that we were just talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like Wisconsin. And then there's like littler ones like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are we going to have the time or the fortitude to actually make a difference in this election, right? I mean, hopefully the state legislatures that are mostly controlled by Republicans can make some differences, make some changes moving forward for next elections. But do you think things can be overturned in the next 2 months?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I think we are in uncharted waters right now. And I think that Trump is working against not just the Democratic Party, but his own party. I think that the Republican Party is increasingly going to, I'm a pessimist if you haven't noticed yet, I think the Republican Party is going to increasingly kind of turn on him or at least shrink away from this. I would be surprised if that doesn't happen. I would be really surprised, just because of the nature of the GOP. The Democrats, whatever you want to say about them, they stick together and they steamroll whatever's in front of them. Republicans are kind of like cats, and they run in all different directions. And there are reports that Ivanka and Jared Kushner had asked him to concede because there's rumors that she wants to run in 2024, and that conceding would save face and not hurt her chances for running for president. So Trump is working against a lot. So if he does not fold in the next 2 months, it would be a sheer act of will.
Which he would be the really only person. Yeah, he'd be the only person I think who would be able to do that. I think the Republicans just need some momentum. They need some like Wisconsin to turn or something, and then it's off to the races. Pedro Gonzalez, America. Yeah, we got to run. Sorry, Pedro. amgreatness.com for American greatness. Appreciate you, Pedro. Have a good day, brother.
Thanks for having me.
Keep us up to date. Yeah, we'll talk. Yesterday I said we were going to do this, but I got confused. Today, next segment, we're going to talk about Obamacare case in the Supreme Court right now. It's coming up. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So there's been some big things in the news lately, and I've been distracted. Right? Haven't been able to pay attention to some other things that have been going on. And one of them is a Supreme Court case going on right now about Obamacare. So to get some insight into that, I want to go to Dr. Bryan. She's an OBGYN in Tampa and a senior affiliated scholar at the wonderful Mercatus Center. Dr. Bryan, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Good.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here. So tell me what's going on in the Supreme Court. What's the case about?
Well, my understanding is it's Texas representing a bunch of states who are opposed to Obamacare, and California, who are representing a bunch of states who are pro-recipient of those funds from Obamacare. And they're pretty much battling it out as to the constitutionality of the law and whether or not we should all move forward as a country with the ACA.
Do you know which part is under scrutiny?
It has to do with basically the Congress's decision in 2017 to zero out the tax penalty. And in a prior decision, the court had decided that the law was constitutional because of Congress's power to tax. And so when you zero out the tax policy, the argument is that that constitutionality has been revoked, is my understanding. Of course, I'm not a legal scholar.
No, that's interesting. You're right, because I remember it was a little shady, a bit of a decision. It was a little sneaky decision that Roberts had by calling it a tax.
Right, yeah.
So they got around that by getting rid of the tax. So now the question is it still constitutional when there's no tax? Whoa.
Right.
Interesting. Wow. Okay, what could be the ramifications if they rule, let's say, on the side of Texas, right? I'm assuming if they rule on the side of California, nothing changes. But if they rule on the side of Texas, what would that mean moving forward for Obamacare?
Well, I think it's going to, in terms of the healthcare industry, introduce quite a bit of chaos because everyone's business model changed with Obamacare or the ACA. So it's going to send the hospitals and clinics and everyone scrambling to try to come up with a new reality. So in terms of regulations, it's going to be a bit chaotic, I think.
Can we end up in a better place in the end, though?
Well, philosophically and also experientially as a physician, I think one of the things that we're battling is lack of efficiency, overspending, and poor outcomes for the money that we're spending in our healthcare system. And so what I see is the ACA actually locked in those inefficiencies through basically giving a booster shot to Medicaid, putting a lot of people into an insurance program that's really doesn't lead to good outcomes. It's been proven that if you have Medicaid, you actually do, well, proven's a strong word, but let's say there's good studies that show that if you have Medicaid, you do worse with health outcomes, even compared to not having insurance at all. So it's, in a lot of ways, Medicaid as an insurance program is the emperor's new clothes, right? Because you're telling people you're giving them insurance, but you're funneling them into an incredibly narrow network, because a lot of providers don't take Medicaid.
Yeah, so why is that? Why would your health outcome be worse if you're on Medicaid versus nothing even?
Well, I think they've seen that emergency department visits don't change because your access to primary care is still equally difficult because it's hard to find a provider to see you. So in terms of being actively managed for disease processes, it's extremely poor. So you're usually at the end stages of your problem by the time you get help, and you're seeking help through the most expensive means possible, which is in the emergency department.
The big government people would say, well, that just means we need more Medicare. We need to expand it. We need to force doctors to accept it.
And the argument is that we're already in an incredibly inefficient system. So, and which has a lot to do with regulatory burden. So it makes it very, very difficult as a provider to innovate, to actually come up with a better way of providing medicine and to emphasize on quality. So we very much are suffering from the traditional fee-for-service model, which is based on volume and not outcomes, and not actively managing disease processes.
Let's go back to the beginning.
Go ahead.
Go back to the beginning. We only have 5 minutes, and this deserves a much longer conversation. We'll have to do it again. But let's go to the philosophical part here of medicine and how our society should view it, should view medicine, should view the role of a doctor and patient and that relationship. What should that look like in a perfect world? And I'd like to know where the perfect world is so we know what direction to even move in, right? I think people have lost their imagination when it comes to what healthcare should look like. So how would you paint that picture?
I would think that the first thing is to understand what health is. So health is having people in your life who care about you, having a safe neighborhood to live in, a great job that excites you, having that sense of positivity and potential. All of that leads to and facilitates good health. In fact, poverty is directly linked to mortality. And you put a doctor in that equation, you still basically die at the same time if you're poor and you're oppressed and you don't have options in your life. And so health care and improving access to a doctor is 20% of what it means to be healthy. 80% is the other stuff: a good economy, a good family structure, a good environment, safe air, clean water, those kind of things. And so when we go bankrupt as a society, paying for the 20% and letting the other 80% go down the toilet, basically because your budgets are being consumed by paying for people like me, then you're going to see everyone's health go and worsen because they don't have the jobs they need, and they don't have the good environment, and they don't have the safe road structures, all the other things that make for a healthy society.
Love that. Okay, let me ask you on the more economic side. How should health care and health insurance be paid for in this perfect society?
I think that the consumer should rule, and I think that's where the free market comes in. It's very much sensitive and responsive to consumer signals, and it allows for a nimbleness and an ability to innovate and respond to the individual's needs. Unfortunately, even with the best heart in the world, federal level, state level policy is not nuanced enough to respond to individual needs and goals. And that's where the free market comes in.
Can you give me an example of a goal that's not properly met by the government?
Well, I would say that, for example, telemedicine is a classic example. So how many of us have had to schlep over to a doctor's office, sit in their little waiting room and, sacrifice a whole afternoon or whole morning just for a 10-minute visit? And it wasn't until COVID that we were actually enabled to have this kind of conversation via video conferencing with our doctor. And it saves an incredible amount of time and travel, expense, lost job hours. And yet we've had this technology and this ability to interact via telemedicine for decades. But the federal government, the state level governments haven't found a mechanism to pay for it. And that's why we haven't had it until, of course, the pandemic hits. And then everyone says, ooh, maybe we really don't all want to be clustered together in a waiting room.
Yeah, so literally today I have to do my insurance for my employer. And I hate it. It's such a mess, dealing with deductibles and out-of-pockets and this and that. And it's so broken. It's just amazing to me that we continue to do this when there's such better ways, but it needs an entire retooling, right?
Right. And, let's face it, you put something into law, you put something into the regulatory apparatus, you've pretty much frozen time. So it leaves very little ability to innovate, to pursue a better model, because in a lot of ways in healthcare, you're penalized for innovating because no one will pay you for it.
Yes, you're right. Yeah, we're frozen in time. So we're probably frozen in what, maybe 1950s model? Something like that?
Yes, I would say that medicine hasn't really changed much.
Wow, that's amazing.
And how we do it. Okay.
No, sorry, I hate we got to run, but we'll, we got to talk again, Dr. Bryan, about big picture stuff. And maybe after the Supreme Court rules and that dust settles, we can talk about what we need to be fighting for again. And the Dr. Bryan from OBGYN in Tampa and from the wonderful Mercatus Center. Thanks, Doctor. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Have a good day. I love to consider, I think it's so education and healthcare are the two things that have the most government control and are the most broken, bankrupt, and backwards. I'll write that down. That was good. Broken, bankrupt, and backwards. And it's because the government's controlling them all. We need to totally imagine and retool every single aspect, burn it to the ground and start from scratch. And with healthcare, maybe the Supreme Court decision coming up will do just that. That's it. It's Friday. Have a wonderful weekend. Rest, relax, rejuvenate. We'll come back on Monday and we'll talk more about how Trump's probably going to pull this thing out. At least I think so today. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word.